Like, and make sure to engage in comments and share this video to your friends and story lovers, and click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Mortifex for more real horror stories like this. Are you sure you're ever truly alone? It's easy to think that when you close the door to your house, the world stays outside. But what if someone was watching, waiting, even closer than you ever imagined? Emily thought she was safe. Living alone in her quiet suburban neighborhood, she didn't have much to worry about. Her parents had taken a summer trip to Europe, leaving her to watch the family house. It was the first time she'd ever had the place to herself, and at 26, she felt ready for it. Independence. Freedom. It was her chance to live without anyone hovering over her. But then she started to notice things. Small, subtle things at first. It began one morning when she was heading to work. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows over the street. As Emily backed her car out of the driveway, she noticed a man standing at the corner of her block. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark hoodie that obscured most of his face. He didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly in her direction. She tried to brush it off. Maybe he was waiting for a bus or taking a morning walk, but something about him felt off. His presence lingered in her mind throughout the day, even as she buried herself in tasks at the office. That night, when she got home, she felt it again, the sense of being watched. She scanned the street before getting out of her car but saw nothing. The neighborhood was silent, the streetlights casting their usual pools of light. Yet, as she locked the front door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't as alone as she thought. The following days only deepened her unease. She started to see the man more frequently. Once, he was sitting on a bench near her office, his eyes following her as she walked to her car. Another time, she spotted him across the grocery store parking lot. He never approached her, never said a word, but his presence felt like a shadow she couldn't escape. Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just someone from the neighborhood. Maybe she was imagining things, letting her mind play tricks on her, because she wasn't used to being alone. But the breaking point came one night. It was past midnight, and Emily was lying in bed, scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself from the creeping anxiety that had been building all week. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Then she heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from outside her bedroom window. Her heart froze. She lay perfectly still, the phone slipping from her hand onto the bed. The scraping sound came again, faint but unmistakable. It was like nails dragging lightly against the glass. Emily's bedroom was on the second floor, so the idea of someone being outside her window felt absurd, but that didn't make the sound any less real. She forced herself to sit up, her pulse pounding in her ears, and stared at the window. The blinds were drawn, but through the narrow gap between the slats, she thought she saw movement. She debated what to do. Should she look? Should she call someone? Her parents were thousands of miles away, and she didn't want to scare them. She grabbed her phone, her trembling fingers hovering over the keypad. Before she could dial, there was a loud thud. This time, it wasn't from the window. It was from downstairs. Emily's breath hitched. She strained to listen, every muscle in her body taut. The house settled with its usual creaks, but underneath it she swore she could hear the faintest sound of footsteps. Her first thought was to call the police, but then a wave of doubt hit her. What if she was overreacting? What if it was just her imagination? Or worse, what if the sound was nothing, and the police thought she was wasting their time? Another thud jolted her from her thoughts, this one louder and more distinct. It was followed by a dragging noise, like something heavy being moved across the floor. Emily couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept under her bed, something her dad had insisted on leaving for her just in case, and crept toward her bedroom door. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might give her away. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. She moved slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and made her way to the top of the stairs. Peering down, she could see the faint outline of the living room below. Everything looked normal, no shadows moving, no signs of an intruder, but the feeling of unease was overwhelming. As she debated whether to go down or retreat back to her room, a sudden chill ran down her spine. She glanced back toward her bedroom window. The blinds were now open. Panic surged through her. She hadn't touched the blinds, and from where she was standing, she could see that the window was slightly ajar, the lock undone. Her mind raced. Had she left it open earlier and forgotten, or had someone? Her thoughts were cut off by the sound of her phone buzzing in her hand. The noise was jarring in the silence, and she almost dropped it. The screen lit up with an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was silence on the other end. For a moment she thought it might be a prank or a wrong number, but then a low, raspy voice spoke. "Nice house," it said. Emily's blood ran cold. She hung up immediately, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Whoever this was, they weren't just stalking her from a distance. They were inside her world now, invading it in ways she couldn't escape. She backed into her bedroom, locking the door behind her and pushing a chair under the knob for good measure. Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She could hear faint sounds again. This time it was as if someone was moving downstairs, pacing slowly, deliberately. Her phone buzzed again, another call from the same number. She didn't answer this time, but a text popped up seconds later. "Why don't you come downstairs? I'm waiting." Emily's breath came in shallow, panicked gasps as she stared at the message on her screen. Her hands were trembling so violently she almost dropped the phone. The pacing sounds downstairs stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the pounding of her heart. Her eyes darted to the chair she'd wedged under the doorknob. Would it even hold if someone tried to break in? Her instinct screamed at her to do something, anything, but her body felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of fear. Then the floor creaked. Not downstairs this time. No, this sound was closer, on the staircase. Emily's eyes widened in terror. He was coming up. She pressed her back against the far wall, clutching the baseball bat in one hand and her phone in the other. The phone screen dimmed as the auto lock activated, plunging her back into near total darkness. She frantically tapped it to life again, needing the faint glow to keep her grounded. Another creak. Closer now. She tightened her grip on the bat, her knuckles white. Every ounce of logic told her she should call the police, but she couldn't bring herself to make a sound. The fear of him hearing her outweighed everything else. Her phone buzzed in her hand and she almost screamed. Another text. "I can hear you breathing." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She pressed herself further into the wall, her body trembling uncontrollably. A soft tapping sound echoed from the hallway outside her door. It wasn't a knock. It was more deliberate, more taunting. Her stomach churned as the tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of the doorknob rattling. He was testing it, trying to open it. "Go away," she whispered, barely audible even to herself. The rattling stopped. Silence. For a moment, she thought maybe, just maybe, he had left. And then the chair under the knob shifted slightly, scraping against the floor. He was pushing on the door now, harder and harder. The wooden frame groaned under the pressure. Emily's survival instincts finally kicked in. She scrambled to unlock her phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen as she dialed 911. The line rang once, twice. A loud crash cut through the air as the door burst open, the chair skidding across the room. Emily screamed. Emily's scream echoed through the room as the door slammed against the wall. Standing in the doorway was the man she had been dreading, the same figure she'd seen on the street corner, at her office, and outside the grocery store. His face was finally visible, illuminated by the dim light spilling in from the hallway. His expression was cold, his dark eyes locked on hers, with a chilling intensity that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, filling the space with his presence, as if daring her to make a move. Emily's hand tightened around the baseball bat. Her phone was still in her other hand, the 911 operator's voice faintly audible on the line. "Hello? Are you there? What's your emergency?" The sound seemed to jolt the man into action. He took a deliberate step into the room, and Emily's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She swung the bat with all her strength, aiming for his head, but he was faster. He ducked, and the bat hit the door frame with a loud crack. The force of the swing threw her off balance, and before she could recover, he lunged at her, grabbing her wrist. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a sickening thud. Emily fought back with everything she had. She kicked, screamed, and tried to wrench her arm free, but his grip was like iron. The bat fell from her other hand, and she was forced back against the wall. "You think you're clever?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, calling for help like that. Emily's mind raced. The phone was still on the floor, the operator's voice faint but persistent. Maybe they could trace the call. Maybe the police were already on their way. She had to stall him, keep him distracted. "Why are you doing this?" she gasped, her voice shaking. He smirked, a twisted expression that made her stomach churn. "Because I can," he said simply. Before she could respond, they both froze at the sound of a loud knock on the front door. "Police! Open up!" The man's grip loosened for just a second, but it was all Emily needed. She shoved him as hard as she could, sending him stumbling backward. She grabbed the bat again and swung it at his legs, making contact this time. He let out a grunt of pain and fell to the floor. Emily didn't wait to see what would happen next. She bolted out of the room, sprinting down the hallway and practically flying down the stairs. The knocking at the front door turned into pounding. "Help! I'm in here!" she screamed, her voice raw. She reached the door just as the officers broke it open. Two uniformed men rushed in, guns drawn, their eyes scanning the room. "He's upstairs!" Emily cried, pointing toward the staircase. The officers didn't hesitate. They stormed up the stairs, their heavy boots echoing through the house. Emily collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Moments later, she heard a commotion upstairs, the sound of a struggle, followed by the man shouting angrily as the officers subdued him. "It's over," one of the officers said as he came back down, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're safe now." Emily nodded, though tears were streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't even process what had just happened. As they led the man out of the house in handcuffs, he turned to look at her one last time. His eyes burned with a hatred that made her shiver. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and menacing. But Emily didn't care. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could finally breathe. The nightmare was over, or so she thought. Click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Mortifex for more real and true stories like this.